What if I told you that one of the most feared names in biblical history was once among God's most trusted angels? Azazel, a name that strikes terror into the hearts of believers and scholars alike, wasn't always the leader of rebellion and corruption we know today. In fact, his fall from grace is so shocking that entire books of scripture were written to warn humanity about his influence. Today, we're diving deep into the complete, unfiltered story of Azazel, from his origins in heaven's highest ranks to his role as the architect of humanity's first great corruption. You'll discover secrets about this fallen angel that most people have never heard, including the forbidden knowledge he taught mankind and why his punishment was unlike any other. Though before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Thank you for joining me today. As always, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. So let us know in the comments and share what time it is for you there. It really makes us feel like the global community it is. Now let's dive into today's story, shall we? The Desert Demon. In the heart of the ancient wilderness, where the sun scorches the sand and silence weighs heavy, there exists a ritual so strange that it has puzzled scholars for thousands of years. Picture this. The high priest of the temple stands before two goats. Both animals are perfect, unblemished. One will meet its end on the altar, its blood offered to the divine. The other faces a different fate entirely. The priest places both hands on the second goat's head. He speaks the sins of the people over it, transferring every transgression, every failure, every dark thought onto this living creature. Then the goat is led away, driven into the barren wilderness where no one dwells. It carries the weight of an entire nation's wrongdoing into the emptiness beyond civilization. But here's what makes this ceremony truly unsettling. The goat isn't simply released into nature. According to the text in Leviticus chapter 16, it is sent for Azazel. Not to Azazel, not because of Azazel, but for him. The Hebrew preposition suggests a destination, a recipient waiting in those desolate places. This ceremony happens once a year on the Day of Atonement, the holiest day in the ancient calendar. The high priest enters the most sacred space, the inner sanctuary where the divine presence dwells. He performs elaborate rituals involving incense, blood, and careful attention to every detail. One mistake could mean his end. The tension in the air is thick as smoke. Yet amid all this sacred activity, this ceremony for the goat stands apart. While one goat's blood cleanses the sanctuary, the other goat doesn't die on holy ground. It vanishes into the wilderness, and the text tells us this wilderness belongs to someone. It belongs to Azazel. The ancient rabbis debated what this name meant. Some argued it simply described the rocky, dangerous terrain where the goat was sent. Others insisted it referred to something far more troubling, a being who dwells in those forsaken places, a power that exists outside the boundaries of civilization and divine order. The ritual itself reveals something profound about ancient understanding of evil. Sin isn't merely forgiven and forgotten. It must go somewhere. It must be dealt with, removed, sent away from the presence of the holy. The scapegoat becomes a vessel carrying corruption back to its source. Consider the geography of this ritual. The wilderness in ancient Near Eastern thought wasn't simply uninhabited land. It represented chaos, the opposite of creation and order. When divine power spoke the world into being, it pushed back the chaos and established boundaries. The wilderness remained as a reminder of what existed before, a realm where the rules of civilization don't apply. This is where Azazel dwells. Not in the temple, not in the cultivated fields, not in the cities where people gather and laws maintain order. He exists in the spaces between, in the howling emptiness where demons were believed to roam. The text from Leviticus doesn't explain who Azazel is or why the goat goes to him. It simply states the ritual as fact, as if the readers already understood. Later Jewish writings from the Second Temple period, texts valued in ancient Judaism but not included in most modern biblical canons, expand on this mysterious figure. They describe him as a fallen angel, a corrupter of humanity, a being so dangerous that he must remain bound in the wilderness until the end of days. These texts suggest the ritual isn't about appeasing Azazel or making an offering to him. Rather, it returns sin to the one who introduced it to the world in the first place. The goat stumbles through the rocky terrain, driven farther and farther from human habitation. Ancient sources describe how it would be led to a cliff and pushed over, ensuring it could never return. The creature carrying the people's sins meets its end in Azazel's domain, sealing the transfer of guilt from the holy community to the realm of chaos and darkness. This ritual operated for centuries, performed year after year by priests who understood they were engaging with powers beyond simple symbolism. They weren't just performing theater. They believed something real happened when that goat vanished into the wilderness. The community's slate was wiped clean and the pollution of sin was removed to where it belonged. But questions linger in the shadows of this ancient ceremony. Who is this Azazel? Why does he dwell in the wilderness? What gave him the authority to receive the sins of an entire people? The ritual itself offers no answers, only the stark reality of a name spoken once a year, a name connected to darkness, exile, and the wild places where humans dare not tread. The Day of Atonement ritual stands as a doorway into a worldview where the boundary between physical and spiritual was far thinner than modern minds typically imagine. The goat wasn't merely symbolic. Azazel wasn't merely metaphorical. Something was happening in that wilderness, something the ancient priests understood, even if they couldn't fully explain it. This ceremony is our first glimpse of Azazel, but it's only the beginning. The ritual raises more questions than it answers, pointing toward a deeper story hidden in ancient texts, a story of rebellion, corruption, and judgment that would echo through centuries of religious tradition. Beyond the ritual, the name's eerie meaning. Names in the ancient world carried power. They weren't arbitrary labels, but revealed the essence of what they described. When parents named a child, they spoke destiny over them. When divine beings received names, those names contained clues about their nature and purpose. So when we encounter the name Azazel, we must ask, what does it reveal about this wilderness dweller? The Hebrew letters that form Azazel have sparked debate among scholars for generations. The name appears in ancient texts without explanation, as if the original audience needed no introduction. Yet its meaning remains contested, with each proposed translation opening a different window into his nature. One interpretation reads the name as God strengthens, or strength of God. This translation seems almost ironic when applied to a being associated with sin and wilderness. Yet it suggests something important. Azazel once possessed divine power. The name hints at his origin, pointing back to a time before his association with darkness and exile. Another reading translates Azazel as fierce God or strong God. This interpretation emphasizes raw power, the kind of force that operates beyond moral boundaries. It suggests a being of immense capability, one who channels divine strength toward purposes that oppose the established order. The fierce quality implied here matches the terror associated with the wilderness, where nature operates without mercy or compromise. But perhaps the most compelling translation reads Azazel as goat demon, or the goat that departs. This interpretation connects directly to the scapegoat ritual, creating a circular meaning. The goat goes to the goat demon. Sin returns to the one associated with its origin. This reading suggests Azazel's identity became so intertwined with the ritual that his name and the ceremony merged into one concept. The linguistic structure of the name provides additional clues. It combines two elements, a pattern common in Hebrew names. The first part, Azaz, relates to strength, fierceness, or roughness. The second part, El, refers to God or divine power. This combination creates tension within the name itself, yoking raw, untamed force to the divine realm. Some ancient interpreters read the name as removal of God or God removes. This translation frames Azazel as the mechanism of divine separation, the means by which the holy pushes away what cannot coexist with purity. It positions him not as an independent rebel, but as a necessary opposite, the place where rejected things must go. The ambiguity surrounding the name reflects a deeper reality about Azazel's nature. He exists in the spaces between clear categories. Not quite a god, not quite a demon, not fully explained by the texts that mention him. The uncertainty embedded in his name mirrors the uncertainty surrounding his role in the cosmic order. Ancient Near Eastern languages offer parallel concepts that illuminate Azazel's nature. Other cultures in the region spoke of wilderness spirits, demons who inhabited the desolate places beyond human control. These beings were associated with chaos, sickness, and the dangers that lurked outside civilization's protective boundaries. Azazel fits this pattern while also standing apart, connected specifically to the community's moral pollution rather than general misfortune. The name appears in texts from different periods, and its usage evolved over centuries. Early references treat it almost casually, assuming readers understand the reference. Later writings expand on the name, connecting it to stories of fallen angels and cosmic rebellion. This evolution suggests Azazel's identity grew more complex over time, absorbing related traditions and concepts. Consider how the name would have sounded to ancient ears. When the high priest spoke Azazel over the goat on the Day of Atonement, the syllables carried weight. The crowd would have understood they were invoking something real, something powerful, something dwelling in the wilderness beyond their borders. The name itself became a verbal boundary marker, distinguishing the realm of holiness from the realm of exile. The phonetic qualities of the name matter too. The repeated Z sounds create a harsh, almost hissing quality. It's not a gentle name, not comforting or warm. It sounds like wind through rocky canyons, like the scrape of stone on stone, like the territory it describes. Different translations of ancient texts render the name in various ways. Some transliterate it directly as Azazel. Others attempt to translate its meaning, calling him the scapegoat, or the one who removes. Still, others leave it as a proper name, treating it as referring to a specific being rather than a general concept. Each choice reflects an interpretive decision about what Azazel fundamentally is. The name's etymology connects to concepts of strength and ruggedness, qualities associated with the wilderness landscape itself. Rocky cliffs, harsh sun, unforgiving terrain where only the strongest survive. Azazel's name links him permanently to this environment, suggesting he doesn't merely inhabit the wilderness, but embodies it, represents it, rules it. Beyond its linguistic components, the name carries emotional resonance. It sounds foreign, other, separate from the familiar names of prophets and patriarchs. It belongs to the realm beyond the known world, marking the boundary between sacred space and dangerous territory. When ancient listeners heard this name, they understood they were approaching something that existed outside normal categories of understanding. The scholarly debates about the name's meaning reveal something important. After thousands of years, we still aren't certain what it means. This uncertainty isn't a weakness in the historical record, but a feature of Azazel's nature. He remains partially obscured, his true essence hidden behind multiple possible meanings, each one true in its own way. The name itself becomes a mystery, appropriate for a being whose story unfolds in shadows and wilderness places. The Watchers descend, the pre-flood rebellion. Long before the Great Deluge swept the world clean, before humanity spread across the earth in its current form, divine beings watched over creation. These weren't distant, detached observers. They were the Watchers, angels assigned to guard and guide the unfolding of mortal life. Their eyes tracked human development, and their role was to observe without interfering, to witness without becoming entangled in the affairs of flesh and blood. The Book of Enoch, a text revered in Second Temple Judaism, though not included in most modern scriptural canons, preserves this account. It describes a time when the boundary between heaven and earth was more permeable, when angels moved between realms with greater freedom. The Watchers stationed themselves at their appointed places, maintaining vigilance over the world below. Mount Hermon rises in the northern mountainous regions, its snow-capped peaks visible from great distances. The mountain stands as a natural boundary marker, a place where earth reaches toward heaven. According to the Enochic tradition, this mountain became the site of a momentous gathering. 200 watchers assembled on its summit and made a collective decision that would reshape the course of human history. According to the Enochic account preserved in the Book of Enoch, these angels weren't acting on impulse. The text describes how they discussed among themselves, weighing their options and considering the consequences. They saw the daughters of humanity, and something shifted within them. Desire awakened where it shouldn't exist. They looked at mortal women and saw beauty, and that beauty called to something deep within their being. The leader of this assembly was named Shemhaza, though his story intertwines with Azazel's in complex ways. Shemhaza proposed a pact. The angels would descend together, binding themselves through oath to ensure no single watcher could back out once the decision was made. They understood the gravity of what they planned. They knew it violated their assigned role. The oath they swore on Mount Hermon carried tremendous weight. In the ancient world, oaths invoked divine witness and called down curses on those who broke their word. These angels bound themselves through mutual cursing, agreeing that each would share the guilt and consequences of their collective action. No one could claim innocence or ignorance later. 200 angels descended from Mount Hermon. They left their positions as observers and entered directly into human affairs. The text names their leaders, preserving the identity of those who led the rebellion. Names like Shemhaza, Azazel, Arakalba, Ramil, Kokablo. Each name carried its own meaning. Its own connection to divine authority now turned toward unauthorized purposes. The Watchers' original purpose had been noble. They were meant to guard humanity, to watch over the development of mortal civilization without interference. They represented divine care, the attention of heaven directed toward earth. But somewhere in their watching, the boundary eroded. Observation became fascination. Fascination became desire. Desire became action. This descent marked a fundamental violation of cosmic order. Angels belonged to the heavenly realm, humans to the earthly. These categories weren't merely descriptive, but prescriptive, establishing proper boundaries for different orders of being. When the Watchers crossed from heaven to earth with intent to marry mortal women, they shattered a boundary that was meant to remain firm. The decision didn't happen suddenly. The Enochic text suggests a process of consideration and deliberation. The Watchers saw what was happening in human society, saw the beauty and vitality of mortal life, and something within them yearned to participate rather than merely observe. This yearning grew until it overwhelmed their assigned purpose. Mount Hermon itself becomes significant in this account. Mountains in ancient cosmology represented places where heaven and earth drew close to each other. They were liminal spaces, thresholds between realms. The choice of this mountain for the Watcher's Oath wasn't random. They gathered at a place already associated with divine human connection, but they twisted that connection toward unauthorized ends. The text preserves a sense of tragic inevitability about this descent. Once the oath was sworn, once the decision was made collective and binding, there was no turning back. The angels who bound themselves through mutual cursing were now committed to a path that would lead to judgment and destruction. Their unity, which might have been noble in service of their original purpose, became the mechanism of their downfall. The number 200 matters. This wasn't a small group of rebels or a handful of rogue angels. It represented a significant portion of the heavenly host assigned to watch over humanity. The rebellion had scale and organization. It was coordinated, planned, deliberate. This wasn't passion overcoming reason in a moment of weakness. It was a calculated decision made by beings who understood divine law and chose to break it anyway. The Watcher's descent set in motion a cascade of consequences that would require divine intervention to address. They didn't simply take human wives and settle into mortal life. Their presence and actions introduced corruption into the world in ways that would multiply and spread. Each Watcher contributed to this corruption in different ways, but they all shared responsibility for the initial violation. Some ancient readers of this text saw the Watcher's fall as an explanation for evil's origin in the world. Humanity had turned away from the Creator before, but the Watcher's rebellion introduced a new dimension of corruption. It brought forbidden knowledge, unnatural offspring, and systematic violence into human experience. The pre-flood world became increasingly chaotic and dangerous as a result. The account resonates with deep questions about free will and cosmic order. These angels weren't created evil. They were assigned a purpose and given the capacity to fulfill it. Yet they chose differently. Their choice demonstrates that even beings of greater power and knowledge than humans can turn away from their proper role. The capacity for rebellion exists across different orders of being. Mount Hermon stands today much as it did millennia ago, its peaks rising above the surrounding landscape. Ancient traditions preserve the memory of what happened there, and the mountain became associated with the beginning of angelic corruption. The place where heaven and earth should have met in harmony instead became the launching point for cosmic rebellion. The Watcher's story is one of squandered purpose. They were given an important role, entrusted with significant responsibility, granted proximity to both divine and human realms. Instead of faithfully fulfilling their assignment, they chose to abandon it for immediate gratification. Their descent from Mount Hermon marked the beginning of a story that would end in judgment, imprisonment, and eternal condemnation. Azazel's sin, the teacher of forbidden knowledge. Among the 200 watchers who descended from Mount Hermon, Azazel stood apart. While his companions pursued mortal women and violated the boundary between angel and human through marriage, Azazel's corruption took a different form. His sin wasn't primarily about desire or breaking divine-human separation. His crime was teaching, and what he taught would poison human civilization in ways that persist to this day. The Book of Enoch provides specific details about Azazel's actions. He taught men the art of metalworking, showing them how to extract ore from the earth and forge it into weapons. Before Azazel's instruction, humanity possessed basic tools and simple implements. After his teaching, they gained the knowledge to create swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. The technology of warfare entered the world through his lessons. Consider what this knowledge represented. Metal weapons changed everything about human conflict. Before them, disputes might be settled through strength or simple weapons made of wood and stone. After them, one person could end another's life with terrible efficiency. The scale of violence increased dramatically. What Azazel taught wasn't merely a craft, but a capacity for destruction that transformed human society. But his teaching didn't stop with weapons. Azazel also revealed the secrets of mining and metallurgy, showing humans how to work with different metals for various purposes. He taught the extraction and processing of copper, iron, silver, and gold. These weren't merely practical skills. They represented knowledge that angels possessed about the structure of creation, information about the earth's hidden treasures that humanity wasn't meant to access yet. The text specifically mentions how Azazel taught women the art of cosmetics and beautification. He showed them how to use antimony to darken their eyes, how to employ precious stones and colored materials for adornment. This teaching might seem less dangerous than weapon making, but the Enochic author considered it part of the same corruption. It introduced vanity, deception, and artificial enhancement of natural beauty. It encouraged people to present false appearances rather than reveal their true nature. Azazel also taught the knowledge of dyes and the coloring of fabric. Before his instruction, clothing served basic purposes of protection and modesty. After his teaching, garments became tools of status display and seduction. The ability to create vibrant colors and elaborate clothing transformed social dynamics, introducing hierarchy and envy based on appearance. Each piece of knowledge Azazel shared had consequences that rippled through human civilization. The weapons led to increased violence and warfare. The cosmetics and dyes fed vanity and deception. The metallurgy gave humans access to materials and techniques that accelerated their development beyond what was intended for that stage of their existence. Azazel essentially forced humanity through a premature technological revolution. The Enochic text frames this teaching as a profound violation. Knowledge has its proper time and place. Azazel revealed information before humanity was ready to handle it responsibly. Like giving fire to children, he provided capabilities without the wisdom to use them appropriately. The result was predictable. Humans took what they learned and employed it in ways that increased suffering and corruption. Think about how metallurgy would have appeared to people who had never seen it before. The ability to extract metal from rock, to heat it until it became liquid, to shape it into tools and weapons, would seem almost magical. Azazel was sharing something from the divine realm, secret knowledge about how the world worked at a fundamental level. This wasn't meant for human understanding, not yet. The weapons Azazel taught humans to create had immediate effects. Violence escalated. Conflicts that might have ended with bruises now ended with graves. The strong had always dominated the weak, but now the armed could dominate everyone else. The introduction of metallurgical warfare technology restructured human society around organized violence in ways that hadn't existed before. Azazel's teaching about cosmetics and adornment wasn't merely about vanity. It introduced the concept of mask wearing, of presenting a false face to the world. The natural distinctions between people became obscured by artificial enhancement. Beauty, which had been a matter of genetics and health, became something that could be purchased and applied. This shift had profound social implications. The text connects all these teachings to a single source, Azazel. While other watchers contributed to human corruption through their offspring or other revelations, Azazel's specific crime was this transfer of forbidden knowledge. He became the prototype of the tempter who offers knowledge that shouldn't be possessed, power that corrupts rather than elevates. What makes Azazel's sin particularly insidious is its permanence. The watchers who took human wives produced children who eventually perished in the flood. But the knowledge Azazel taught couldn't be forgotten once learned. Humanity carried it forward across generations. The techniques of metalworking, the understanding of cosmetics and dyes, the capacity to forge weapons, all of this persisted even after the Watchers were judged and imprisoned. The text suggests Azazel knew what he was doing. This wasn't accidental knowledge transfer or innocent teaching. He deliberately revealed information that he understood would corrupt human society. His motivation remains somewhat obscure, but the effect was clear. He accelerated human development in ways that increased their capacity for violence and deception. Ancient readers would have seen in Azazel's teaching an explanation for aspects of their world that seemed problematic. Why do humans have the capacity to create such terrible weapons? Why does vanity and deception come so naturally? Why do we possess knowledge that we often use destructively? The Enochic answer, because a fallen angel taught us these things before we were ready to handle them. Azazel's role as teacher distinguishes him from the other watchers. Shemhaza violated divine order through sexual transgression. Azazel violated it through pedagogical transgression. He passed knowledge across a boundary that should have remained firm. In some ways, his sin was more subtle than Shemhaza's, but equally profound in its consequences. The specific combination of what Azazel taught reveals a pattern: weapons for violence, cosmetics for deception, metallurgy for manipulation of the natural world. Each area of knowledge he revealed gave humans greater power to act against each other and against the intended order of creation. He wasn't teaching them to grow better crops or build stronger homes. He taught them to make war and to deceive. The Shemhaza connection, a partnership in evil. The story of the Watchers' Rebellion isn't a simple tale with a single villain. While Azazel's corruption of humanity through forbidden teaching stands as a particular crime, it occurred within a larger pattern of angelic transgression led by another figure, Shemhaza, the chief of the fallen Watchers. Understanding the relationship between these two provides crucial context for grasping the full scope of angelic rebellion. Shemhaza's name appears first in the Enochic lists of rebel angels. He organized the assembly on Mount Hermon, where the Watchers swore their binding oath. In the hierarchy of this rebellion, he functioned as the primary leader, the one who proposed the initial dissent and convinced others to join him. His authority among the Watchers made him responsible for initiating the violation that would lead to widespread corruption. Where Azazel's sin involved teaching forbidden knowledge, Shemhaza's crime centered on violating the boundary between divine and human through sexual union. He and the angels following him took human women as wives, producing offspring that were never meant to exist. According to the Enochic interpretation, these unions represented a fundamental confusion of categories, a mixing of what should have remained separate. The offspring of these unions became known as the Nephilim, often translated as giants, though the term carries implications beyond mere size. These beings inherited power from their angelic fathers and mortality from their human mothers, creating a hybrid existence that fit nowhere in the created order. They belonged to neither the heavenly nor the earthly realm, existing as anomalies that disrupted the natural functioning of creation. Shemhaza's leadership role meant he bore primary responsibility for the Watchers' descent. The text portrays him suggesting the idea to the others, recognizing their shared desire and proposing collective action. He understood that individual dissent would likely lead to individual punishment, but a group action might provide protection through numbers. His suggestion of a binding oath revealed both his cunning and his miscalculation about divine justice. The relationship between Shemhaza and Azazel represents two different but complementary forms of corruption. Shemhaza corrupted the order of being through inappropriate mixing of angel and human. Azazel corrupted human development through premature revelation of knowledge. Together, their actions attacked creation from two directions, through what humans were and through what humans knew. Think of it as a two-pronged assault on the divine plan. Shemhaza introduced biological corruption through the Nephilim, creating beings that shouldn't exist and whose violent nature would terrorize humanity. Azazel introduced cultural corruption through forbidden knowledge, giving humans capabilities they would use destructively. Both forms of corruption fed off each other, creating a spiral of increasing chaos in the pre-flood world. The Nephilim giants became a plague upon the earth. Their strength and appetites exceeded those of normal humans. The text describes how they consumed all that humans had produced, then turned to devouring the humans themselves. These hybrid beings operated without restraint, their mixed nature leaving them with power but no proper place in the moral order. They became agents of violence and devastation. Shemhaza also taught forbidden knowledge, though the specific content differed from Azazel's teachings. He revealed enchantments and root cutting, knowledge related to magic and manipulation of natural forces through occult means. This teaching paralleled Azazel's revelations, showing that multiple Watchers were sharing information that humans weren't meant to possess. The other named Watchers each contributed their own specific corruptions. Arachilba taught the signs of the earth, Ramiel taught astronomy, Kokoblel revealed the constellations, Ezekiel taught knowledge of clouds. Each angel shared information from the divine perspective that humans could access but shouldn't have received through angelic teaching. The pattern established by Shemhaza and Azazel spread among their companions. What united Shemhaza and Azazel was their understanding that breaking one divine law made breaking others easier. Once the boundary between heaven and earth was violated through dissent, once the oath binding the Watchers was sworn, additional violations followed naturally. The initial transgression opened the door for subsequent corruptions. The text preserves tension between these two figures without fully resolving it. Shemhaza led the initial dissent and bore responsibility for the organization of rebellion. Azazel's specific teachings, however, received particular emphasis and condemnation. Both were guilty, but their guilt took different forms and would lead to different punishments. Shemhaza showed awareness of the consequences of his actions. Later portions of the Enochic text describe his distress when he understood divine judgment was coming. He saw the dreams and visions of the Nephilim, understanding they prophesied destruction. His earlier confidence gave way to recognition that his scheme had failed and punishment would follow. The partnership between these two fallen Watchers demonstrates how evil operates through cooperation and division of labor. Shemhaza provided leadership and organization. Azazel provided specific expertise in corrupting humanity through education. Together they accomplished what neither could have achieved alone, a comprehensive corruption of the pre-flood world that would require divine intervention to address. Their rebellion wasn't motivated by hatred of humanity or desire to oppose the divine directly. Rather, it sprang from desire, for human women in Shemhaza's case, and for the satisfaction of sharing forbidden knowledge in Azazel's. This makes their sin more tragic in some ways. They fell not from malice, but from following impulses that should have been restrained. The offspring of Shemhaza and the other Watchers created immediate problems. The Nephilim consumed resources, committed violence, and spread fear. But Azazel's teaching created problems that would outlast the Nephilim themselves. The knowledge couldn't be unlearned once humanity possessed it. This made Azazel's corruption in some ways more lasting than Shemhaza's. Both angels understood they were violating divine order, yet they proceeded anyway. The text emphasizes their deliberation and planning, showing this wasn't impulsive action, but calculated rebellion. They weighed the risks and decided the satisfaction of their desires outweighed the certainty of punishment. This choice defines them both, linking them forever in the story of angelic fall. The connection between Shemhaza and Azazel reveals something important about the nature of systematic evil. It rarely comes from a single source or takes a single form. Instead, different corruptions worked together, reinforcing and amplifying each other. The biological corruption through the Nephilim and the cultural corruption through forbidden knowledge combined to create a world so damaged that it required the drastic solution of the flood to cleanse it. Violence spread across the earth like a plague. The metalworking techniques Azazel had taught were perfected into instruments of war. Swords clashed in valleys that had once known only peace. Armor was forged in fires that burned day and night. The art of warfare, once unknown to humanity, became the dominant pursuit of entire generations. Communities that had lived in harmony for centuries now fortified their settlements and trained their young for battle. The boundary between the seen and unseen worlds had been shattered, and chaos reigned in both realms. The cosmic consequences. Chaos on earth and in heaven. The world began to crumble under the weight of forbidden knowledge. What the Watchers had set in motion could not be contained. Their descent to Mount Hermon had seemed like a singular act of rebellion, but the consequences rippled outward like waves from a stone cast into still water. Each ripple grew larger, more violent, until the very fabric of creation trembled. The children born from the union of Watchers and human women were unlike anything the earth had seen. The Book of Enoch describes these Nephilim as giants, beings of immense size and insatiable hunger. They consumed the produce of the fields until nothing remained. They devoured the livestock until the herds were empty. Then they turned their appetite toward humanity itself. These giants walked the earth as living catastrophes, and their presence alone brought suffering to every corner of the ancient lands. Beyond their physical destruction, the Nephilim carried something darker within them. They were born of a union that violated the divine order, a mixing of heavenly and earthly that was never meant to be. Their very existence corrupted the natural world. The knowledge their fathers had taught, the weapons Azazel had revealed, the sorceries and enchantments the other Watchers had shared, now belonged to these hybrid beings. They wielded this forbidden wisdom with neither restraint nor mercy. When these giants eventually perished, according to the text, their spirits would not simply cease to exist. The Book of Enoch describes how the spirits of the slain Nephilim became evil spirits upon the earth, entities that would wander the world, oppressing humanity and spreading corruption even after their physical forms had fallen. The cries of humanity rose to heaven like smoke from a burning city. The Book of Enoch records that 4 archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, heard these cries and brought them before the Most High. The prayers of the suffering reached the divine throne room. The earth itself seemed to groan under the burden of violence and bloodshed. Creation, which had been declared good, now writhed in agony. The divine response was inevitable. The Most High looked upon the corruption and pronounced judgment. The Watchers had broken their covenant. They had abandoned their stations and corrupted the order of heaven and earth. Their punishment would be severe, but more than that, it would be permanent. There would be no redemption, no second chance, no pathway back to their former glory. The judgment would unfold in stages. First, the Watchers themselves would be dealt with, bound and imprisoned before the greater cleansing could begin. They were not mortal beings who could simply be washed away by water. They were eternal creatures who had chosen rebellion. Their punishment would need to match their nature. Only after they were secured would the flood be ordained, the waters rising to cleanse the earth of the violence that had consumed it. The Nephilim would be swept away, their bodies returned to the dust from which all flesh came. Each archangel received specific instructions. Michael was commanded to bind Shemhaza and the Watchers who had followed him. Gabriel was sent to destroy the Nephilim, to set them against one another until they consumed themselves in violence. Uriel was tasked with warning Noah and preserving a remnant of humanity through the coming deluge. And Raphael received the charge concerning Azazel. The cosmic consequences of the Watchers' rebellion extended beyond mere physical destruction. They had introduced a fundamental disorder into creation itself. The separation between heaven and earth, between divine and mortal, between sacred knowledge and human understanding, all these boundaries had been violated. The restoration of order would require more than simply removing the Nephilim. It would require addressing the source of corruption, the teachers who had poisoned humanity with forbidden wisdom. The earth had become a battleground between the forces of order and chaos. Every valley, every mountain, every settlement bore the scars of this conflict. The ancient lands knew no peace. Families buried their loved ones in soil soaked with blood. Fields that should have yielded grain grew nothing but thorns. Rivers ran red with the aftermath of violence. The world that had been created with such care and intention now teetered on the edge of complete collapse. Heaven's patience had reached its limit. The time for judgment had arrived. The archangels descended with their divine mandate, each carrying out their assigned task with precision. The machinery of cosmic justice began to turn, and nothing would remain unchanged. The Watchers would face the consequences of their choices. The earth would be purified. And Azazel, the teacher of warfare and corruption, would receive a punishment designed specifically for his crimes. The Archangel's mission, Raphael's charge against Azazel. Among the 4 archangels who stood before the divine throne, Raphael received perhaps the most specific and terrible commission. While his fellow archangels were sent to bind groups of watchers or to orchestrate the destruction of the Nephilim, Raphael's task was singular and personal. He was sent for one being alone, Azazel. The Book of Enoch preserves the exact words of this divine command. The Most High spoke directly to Raphael, saying, "Bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness." This was not a general order given to all the angels. This was a targeted judgment against a specific rebel. Azazel had earned a punishment distinct from his fellow watchers, a fate tailored to his particular crimes. The command carried weight beyond its simple words. Binding hand and foot was not merely about physical restraint. For a being of Azazel's power, a creature who had walked in the heavenly courts and possessed knowledge beyond human comprehension, this binding represented total humiliation. His hands, which had taught humanity to forge weapons of war, would be rendered useless. His feet, which had descended from the heights of heaven to corrupt the earth, would walk no more. Raphael descended from the divine presence with his orders clear. He was to find Azazel, bind him completely, and transport him to a specific location in the wilderness. The place was called Dudael, a name that carries its own dark resonance in the Enochic tradition. This was not a random prison. The location itself mattered. The wilderness, the desert, the desolate places, these were Azazel's domain, and now they would become his eternal cage. The text specifies that Raphael should make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael. A pit was to be prepared, a hole torn in the earth itself. This opening would serve as Azazel's tomb, his prison, his eternal dwelling place. The archangel was instructed to cast the fallen watcher into this darkness and cover him with rough, jagged stones. The weight of the earth itself would hold him down. More than physical imprisonment awaited Azazel. The command specified that he should dwell there forever. This was not a temporary confinement until some future parole hearing. This was permanent exile from the world above. The being who had once stood in the presence of the divine, who had served in the celestial courts, would now spend eternity in absolute darkness beneath layers of stone and earth. The text adds a detail that deepens the horror of this punishment. Cover his face that he may not see light. Darkness was not merely the absence of Azazel's surroundings. It was forced upon him, imposed upon his very face. The light of heaven, the light of creation, the light that represents divine presence, all of this would be cut off from him completely. He would exist in a void, unable to see, unable to move, unable to exercise any of the power he once possessed. Raphael's mission carried a prophetic dimension as well. The command stated that Azazel should remain bound until the day of the great judgment. His imprisonment in Dudael was not his final punishment. It was merely the holding period before something worse. On that ultimate day of divine justice, Azazel would be led forth from his desert prison and cast into fire. The binding was temporary in the sense that it preceded an even more severe eternal judgment. The archangel's task also included a restorative purpose. The text explains that binding Azazel would allow the whole earth, which has been corrupted by the works that Azazel taught, to be healed. His removal from the world was necessary for creation's restoration. As long as he remained free, his influence would continue to poison the earth. Only by cutting him off completely could the damage he had caused begin to be repaired. Raphael carried out his mission with divine authority. The text does not describe a battle or struggle. There is no account of Azazel fighting against his captor or attempting to escape. The archangel's power, backed by the authority of the Most High, was absolute. Azazel, despite all his knowledge and all his corruption of humanity, was helpless before the divine judgment that came for him. The binding of Azazel stands as one of the most vivid and specific punishments described in the Enochic literature. While other watchers were bound as a group, while the Nephilim were destroyed through mutual violence, Azazel alone received this particular form of imprisonment. His crimes had been specific: teaching warfare, revealing forbidden knowledge, corrupting humanity with weapons and vanity, and therefore his punishment was equally specific. He would be buried in the very wilderness he had claimed as his domain, unable to teach, unable to corrupt, unable even to see the world he had ruined. The punishment in Dudael, imprisoned in the desert. The desert of Dudael stretched endlessly under a merciless sun. Sand and stone, heat and emptiness. This was the landscape of desolation, the place where living things came to perish. In this wasteland, far from any settlement, beyond the reach of any human path, Raphael brought his prisoner. The archangel's work began with tearing open the earth itself. The ground split under divine command, revealing a pit that descended into absolute darkness. This was no natural cave or formation. This was a wound in the earth, carved specifically to hold one being. The opening yawned like a mouth ready to swallow the fallen watcher whole. Azazel was cast into this darkness, his body plummeting into the depths. The being who had once moved freely between heaven and earth now fell into the earth's embrace. He descended past layers of rock and sand, past the roots of ancient stones, into a depth where no light had ever reached. The walls closed around him, tight and pressing, as he reached the bottom of his prison. Raphael followed the divine instructions with precision. He bound Azazel's hands behind him, wrists crossed and secured with bonds that would never loosen. He bound his feet together, ankle to ankle, removing any possibility of movement. The fallen teacher of warfare, who had shown humanity how to forge and wield weapons, now could not even lift his arms. His hands, once used to demonstrate the crafting of swords and shields, were rendered completely useless. The covering of his face came next. Raphael placed something over Azazel's eyes, blocking out even the faint light that might have filtered down from above. Complete darkness enveloped him. The last thing Azazel would have seen before the darkness fell was perhaps the face of his captor, the archangel carrying out heaven's judgment. Then nothing. Only black voids stretching eternally before unseeing eyes. Jagged stones came next. The text specifies rough, sharp rocks, not smooth river stones or carefully placed slabs, but broken, cutting edges that pressed against the prisoner's body. Raphael piled these stones upon Azazel, layer after layer, creating a crushing weight. Each stone added to the burden, pressing down, making movement impossible, ensuring that even if the bonds somehow failed, the sheer mass of rock would hold the fallen watcher in place. The opening was sealed. Earth and stone filled the pit's mouth, erasing any trace of the prison below. The desert surface showed no sign of what lay beneath. To any traveler who might pass this way, though few ever would, there would be nothing to see, just another stretch of desolate wilderness, empty and lifeless, offering no hint of the terrible prisoner buried far below. Time lost meaning in that darkness. Days passed, then weeks, then years, then centuries, at least above ground in the world of light and movement. Below in the pit, everything was static. The text gives no indication of mercy, no suggestion of sleep or unconsciousness that might grant relief. Azazel simply remained, bound and blind, feeling the weight of stones pressing against him, breathing air that tasted of dust and darkness. Whether his awareness continued unbroken or faded into something else, we cannot know. The prison in Dudael became his entire existence, and that existence stretched toward an ending that would not come until the final judgment. The location itself carried significance beyond mere geography. Dudael, according to various interpretations of the Enochic text, was not simply any desert. This was the wilderness, the place of demons, the realm of chaos that existed beyond the ordered world of human civilization. By imprisoning Azazel here, the judgment placed him back in the domain he had claimed. The desert demon was returned to the desert, but now as a prisoner rather than a ruler. The symbolism ran even deeper. Throughout ancient Near Eastern tradition, the wilderness represented the opposite of civilization, the anti-place where order broke down and chaos reigned. Demons and evil spirits were believed to dwell in these desolate regions. By binding Azazel in Dudale, the judgment acknowledged his nature while simultaneously neutralizing his power. He remained a desert demon, but one stripped of all ability to harm or corrupt. The connection to the scapegoat ritual became impossible to ignore. In Leviticus, the goat bearing the sins of the people was sent into the wilderness, specifically to Azazel. Now, the Enochic tradition revealed where that goat was truly going, to the prison of the fallen watcher who bore that name. The yearly ritual was not sending sin into a void, but returning it to its source, to the one imprisoned for teaching humanity how to sin in the first place. Azazel's consciousness remained intact through the long centuries. He could think, remember, and presumably feel regret, or perhaps continued defiance. The text does not describe his inner state, his thoughts, or emotions during this imprisonment. What we can imagine of his experience must remain speculation, though the horror of the situation needs no elaboration. The being who had taught humanity to see and understand things they were never meant to know now saw nothing. The one who had taught them to forge and fight could not move his own hands. The contrast between what he had been and what he had become defined the severity of his punishment. The desert above continued its eternal rhythm. Winds blew across the sands, shifting dunes and erasing any tracks. The sun rose and set, though none of its light reached the depths below. Seasons changed, though the temperature in the deep prison remained constant. The world moved on, recovered from the flood, was repopulated, developed new civilizations, and through it all, Azazel remained exactly where Raphael had placed him, bound in Dudale. Whether he experienced the passage of time, whether consciousness remained in that absolute darkness, the text does not say. What matters is the certainty of his imprisonment, the completeness of his binding, the impossibility of escape. The imprisonment would last until the final judgment. The text makes clear this is not Azazel's ultimate fate, but merely the holding period. On that great and terrible day, when all accounts are settled and all wrongs are addressed, Azazel would be brought forth from his desert prison. He would be led from the darkness of Dudale into a different darkness, the eternal fire prepared for him and his fellow rebels. But until that day came, the pit in the wilderness held him fast. The Day of Atonement revisited, symbolism of the scapegoat. The high priest stood in the courtyard of the tabernacle, his hands resting on the heads of two identical goats. This was the Day of Atonement, the most solemn day in the sacred calendar. The people gathered, waiting in silence as the priest prepared to perform the ancient ritual that would cleanse them of their sins for another year. Lots were cast. One goat would be sacrificed to the Lord, its blood carried into the most holy place to make atonement. But the other goat, the one designated for Azazel, would have a different fate entirely. The priest would place his hands upon its head and confess over it all the sins of the people. Every wrong deed, every failure, every corruption would be symbolically transferred onto this living animal. Then the goat would be led away into the wilderness. A man appointed for this task would take the animal far from the camp, far from any settlement, into the desolate places where humans did not dwell. There in the barren wasteland, the goat would be released. It would wander into the desert, carrying the weight of the nation's sins, never to return. This was the scapegoat, and its destination was to Azazel. For centuries, interpreters struggled with this phrase. What did it mean to send something to Azazel? Some suggested it was simply a place name, a location in the wilderness with no deeper meaning. Others argued it meant for removal or for complete destruction, deriving the word from roots meaning to remove or to go away. The name appeared nowhere else in the Torah, giving no other context to clarify its meaning. The Book of Enoch provided the missing piece. When the Enoch tradition described Azazel's imprisonment in the desert of Dudale, bound beneath stones in the wilderness, the connection became clear. The scapegoat was not being sent into an empty void. It was being sent to the very place where the desert demon himself lay imprisoned. The sins of the people were being returned to their source. This was not a sacrifice to Azazel, a point worth emphasizing. The ritual was not offering the goat to him as one might offer an animal to a deity. The scapegoat was never sacrificed. It was released, sent away, expelled. The act was one of riddance, not worship. The people were not honoring Azazel, but acknowledging the connection between sin and the one who had first taught humanity to transgress. Azazel, according to the Enochic texts, had introduced warfare, weapons, and vanity to humanity. He had taught them how to beautify themselves with cosmetics and jewelry, how to forge swords and shields, how to engage in violence and corruption. These teachings had led to the spread of sin across the earth. They had corrupted creation itself and brought about divine judgment. By sending the sin-laden goat to Azazel, the ritual symbolically acknowledged where these sins had originated. The wilderness location connected everything. Azazel's prison was in the desert, in Dudel, in the desolate places beyond civilization. The scapegoat was sent into the wilderness, into the same realm of chaos and disorder. The two were not just metaphorically linked, but geographically united. The goat bearing the people's sins traveled to the very region where the demon who had taught those sins lay bound beneath the earth. Later rabbinic tradition added details that deepened this connection. In the Mishnah and Talmud, compiled in the early centuries of the Common Era, the ritual of the scapegoat became more elaborate. The goat was not simply released, but was taken to a specific cliff and pushed over, ensuring it died in the wilderness. A crimson thread was tied around its horns, and tradition held that when the sacrifice was accepted, this thread would turn white, signaling divine forgiveness. These additions emphasized the finality of the sin's removal. Some rabbinic sources explicitly identified Azazel as a demonic being, a ruler of the wilderness to whom sins were symbolically returned. The great medieval commentator Rashi, writing in 11th century France, described Azazel as the name of a demon, a harsh and rocky mountain. The influential scholar Nachmanides, writing in 13th century Spain, stated that the scapegoat was sent to the place of the harsh and rugged to the demon, who is the ruler of devastated places. These interpreters, though writing many centuries after the Second Temple period, were familiar with the Enochic traditions and understood the deeper meaning behind the ritual. The ritual's timing also carried weight. The Day of Atonement came once per year, a moment when the accumulated sins of 12 months were ceremonially removed from the community. This was not a daily or weekly occurrence, but an annual purging, a reset of the spiritual ledger. By sending the scapegoat to Azazel's domain once each year, the ritual acknowledged an ongoing reality that sin, introduced into the world through his teaching, needed to be continually addressed and removed. The symbolism extended to the binding imagery. Azazel was bound hand and foot in his desert prison. The scapegoat was likewise bound in a sense, carrying an inescapable burden of sin upon its head. Neither could be freed from what they carried. The goat would die in the wilderness under the weight of the people's transgressions. Azazel would remain eternally in the wilderness under the weight of divine judgment. Both were held captive by the consequences of sin. The modern reader might find this ritual strange or troubling. The idea of transferring sin to an animal, of sending it away to a demon's domain, seems foreign to contemporary religious sensibility. But within its ancient context, the ritual made profound theological sense. It demonstrated that sin had a source, a history, and a proper destination. It showed that removing corruption from the community required more than internal repentance. It required actively expelling evil back to the realm of chaos from which it came. The scapegoat ritual thus served as an annual reminder of the Azazel story. Each year, as the goat was led into the wilderness, the people recalled, even if only dimly, the original rebellion, the teaching of forbidden knowledge, the corruption of humanity, and the divine judgment that bound the teacher of sin in the desert forever. The ritual kept the story alive, woven into the very fabric of their holiest day. The shift in identity, from fallen angel to desert demon, something began to change in how people spoke of Azazel. The texts from the Second Temple period show a gradual but unmistakable shift. The figure who had been a specific rebel, one among many watchers, slowly absorbed other identities. His story merged with other narratives of cosmic rebellion. His name became attached to increasingly darker roles. This transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded across centuries as Jewish thought grappled with questions of evil's origin and nature. Where did wickedness come from? Who opposed the divine will? What force stood behind the temptation and corruption that plagued humanity? These questions demanded answers, and Azazel's story provided raw material for theological development. In the earliest Enochic traditions, Azazel was distinct from the leader of the Watchers. Shem-Hazah held that position. He organized the rebellion, he led the descent to Mount Hermon, he took the oath that bound the Watchers together in their transgression. Azazel's crime was different. He was the teacher, the revealer of forbidden knowledge, the one who corrupted humanity's understanding rather than its bloodline. But as the centuries passed, these distinctions began to blur. Some texts started presenting Azazel himself as the leader of the fallen angels. His teaching role, which had been so specific in First Enoch, expanded into a more general position of authority over the forces of darkness. The teacher became the prince. The revealer of secrets became the chief of demons. The reasons for this shift are complex. As Jewish angelology became more sophisticated during the Second Temple period, there was pressure to simplify the narrative. Multiple fallen angels, with different crimes and different punishments, made for a complicated story. A single adversary, one ultimate rebel, provided clearer theological structure. Azazel's memorable name and his specific punishment made him a natural candidate for this consolidation. The identification with Satan began to take shape. In earlier biblical texts, Satan appeared as a distinct figure, not necessarily a fallen angel at all, but rather a member of the divine court whose role was to test and accuse. The Book of Job presents Satan as prosecuting attorney in heaven's courtroom, acting with divine permission. This Satan was not yet the cosmic rebel of later tradition. Over time, these two figures, Azazel the fallen watcher and Satan the accuser, began to merge in Jewish and early Christian thought. The parallels were compelling. Both represented opposition to the divine will. Both were associated with temptation and corruption. Both had specific roles in leading humanity astray. The theological simplicity of having one ultimate adversary, rather than multiple competing figures of evil, drove this merger forward through the centuries. The Apocalypse of Abraham provides clear evidence of this shift. In this text, dated to the 1st or 2nd century, Azazel appears as the tempter who tries to dissuade Abraham from offering his sacrifice to the Most High. He is explicitly called the disgrace of all the souls of men and is described as having authority over those who practice evil. He is no longer merely the imprisoned teacher of warfare, but an active agent of temptation with ongoing influence in the world. This development parallels what happened in early Christian theology. As the authors of the New Testament wrestled with the nature of evil and opposition to the divine, they drew on these Second Temple traditions. Scholars trace how the figure they called Satan, the devil, the adversary, inherited characteristics from multiple earlier sources, including the Azazel tradition. The fallen morning star of Isaiah, the serpent in Eden, the leader of rebellious angels, the tempter in the wilderness, all these identities merged in Christian demonology. The desert connection remains central through all these changes. Whether called Azazel or Satan, the adversary maintained his association with wilderness places. When Jesus was tempted, the Gospels place him in the desert. When demons were cast out, they sought desolate places to dwell. The wilderness remained the domain of chaos, and its ruler, whatever name he bore, represented the forces opposing divine order. The binding narrative evolved as well. While First Enoch described Azazel's imprisonment as already accomplished, later Christian texts began to speak of Satan being bound in the future, during the Messianic age or at the final judgment. The Book of Revelation, written in the late 1st century as part of Christian scripture, describes an angel coming down from heaven with a chain to bind that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan for 1,000 years. The imagery echoes Raphael's binding of Azazel, but now projected into the end times rather than the ancient past. This shift from past to future tense reflected changing theological needs. If evil was still active in the world, and clearly it was, then the adversary could not be completely bound yet. The story adjusted. Azazel's imprisonment became a template for what would happen to Satan eventually at the end of days. The fallen angel's current binding in Dudale became a prototype for the ultimate binding that awaited all forces of evil. The name itself became less important than the role. Jewish mystical texts refer to Samal, often identified with Satan, who carries out functions similar to Azazel's. Christian demonology developed elaborate hierarchies of fallen angels with Satan at their head. Islamic tradition speaks of Iblis, the jinn who refused to bow to Adam. All these figures share common ancestry with the Azazel of 1st Enoch, inheriting aspects of his story while developing in their own directions. What remained constant was the core narrative pattern. A celestial being rebels against the divine order. This rebel corrupts humanity, teaching forbidden knowledge or inspiring disobedience. Divine judgment follows, including imprisonment or expulsion. The rebel continues to oppose the divine will from a position of reduced but not eliminated power. This pattern, first articulated clearly in the Azazel story, became the template for understanding cosmic evil across multiple religious traditions. The desert demon of the scapegoat ritual had grown into something far larger than his original role. Azazel had become not just one fallen angel among many, but an archetype, a symbol, a name that carried the weight of all rebellion against heaven. His story provided the narrative structure that later traditions would use to explain the presence of evil in a world created good. The teacher of warfare had taught his final lesson, how to tell the story of the fall. Azazel in the Book of Giants, the Dead Sea Scrolls account. The caves near the Salt Sea held secrets for 2,000 years. When shepherds stumbled upon ancient jars in 1947, they uncovered fragments of a world long forgotten. Among the scrolls lay pieces of the Book of Giants, a text that expands the story of the Watchers and their monstrous offspring. These fragments speak of the Nephilim, the giant children born from the union of Watchers and human women. The Book of Giants preserves their dreams, their fears, and their dawning awareness that judgment approaches. Within these broken passages, Azazel appears not as the central figure, but as part of a larger network of fallen beings whose actions brought ruin to the world. The text identifies several giant sons by name. Ohia and Hahia, sons of the Watcher Shemhaza, receive troubling visions in their sleep. Another giant, Mahaway, serves as a messenger between the earthbound Nephilim and their imprisoned fathers. These beings possess tremendous strength and size, yet they remain powerless against the divine decree that seals their fate. The dreams themselves carry weight and terror. In one fragment, the giants see a garden filled with trees. A figure arrives with an axe, cutting down all but 3 of the trees. The symbolism proves clear even to those who dream it. The trees represent the giants themselves, and the coming flood will spare only a remnant of humanity while sweeping away the corrupted bloodlines. Mahaway travels great distances to reach Enoch, the righteous scribe who walked with the divine and was taken up before the flood. The giant seeks interpretation of these dreams, hoping perhaps for mercy or escape. Enoch's response offers no comfort. The giants and their fathers face certain destruction for the violence and corruption they brought into the world. The Book of Giants presents Azazel as one among many watchers who participated in the rebellion. Unlike the Book of Enoch, which singles him out for teaching forbidden knowledge, the fragments from the Salt Sea place him within a collective. The Watchers as a group corrupted humanity. Their giant offspring filled the earth with bloodshed. The entire enterprise ends in chains and fire. One fragment mentions the Watchers by name, listing their crimes. Azazel appears alongside Shemhaza, Asael, and others. Each bears responsibility for specific transgressions, yet all share in the final punishment. The text emphasizes the scope of their rebellion rather than focusing on individual acts. The giants themselves become tragic figures in these passages. Born of forbidden unions, they inherit neither the immortality of angels nor the mortality of humans. They exist in a liminal space, creatures of immense power who nevertheless cannot escape their ordained end. Their dreams reveal an awareness of divine justice closing in around them. Enoch serves as the bridge between worlds in this narrative. He alone can interpret the signs and carry messages between the condemned and the divine. His presence in the Book of Giants reinforces the broader Enochic tradition, where this single righteous figure stands as witness to the fall of the Watchers and the cleansing that must follow. The fragmentary nature of these scrolls leaves gaps in the story. Scholars piece together narrative threads from broken phrases and partial sentences. Yet, even in fragments, the Book of Giants adds depth to the tradition. It shows the consequences of the Watcher's rebellion playing out across generations, affecting not just humanity, but also the monstrous offspring who inherit their father's guilt. The caves preserved these texts through centuries of silence. When the community that treasured these scrolls disappeared, the stories remained, waiting in darkness. The discovery brought ancient voices back into the world, voices that spoke of giants and angels, of dreams and judgment, of a time when heaven and earth mixed in ways that violated the order of creation. Azazel's presence in these fragments connects the Dead Sea community to the broader tradition of Enochic literature. The people who copied and preserved these texts believed in the reality of the Watcher's fall. They saw in these ancient stories a warning about corruption and divine judgment, themes that resonated with their own expectations of coming transformation. The Book of Giants fills in details the Book of Enoch leaves unexplored. While Enoch focuses on the Watchers and their punishment, the Book of Giants gives voice to their offspring. These giant beings, caught between worlds, face annihilation for sins they inherited rather than chose. Their story adds layers of tragedy to the narrative of the flood. The scrolls also reveal how these traditions evolved and spread. Communities across different regions maintained versions of these texts, adapting them to their contexts while preserving core elements. Azazel's story traveled through time and space, carried by scribes who saw in his fall a mirror of ongoing struggles between righteousness and rebellion. When we read these fragments today, we encounter a worldview where spiritual forces actively shape human history. The Watchers descend, they corrupt. Giants walk the earth. Dreams carry messages from the divine realm. Judgment approaches with the certainty of rising water. In this framework, Azazel represents one thread in a complex tapestry of cosmic rebellion and restoration. The Apocalypse of Abraham, Azazel as the Great Tempter. A different text casts Azazel in a new light. The Apocalypse of Abraham, written sometime in the 1st or 2nd century, transforms him from imprisoned watcher into active adversary. Here, Azazel meets the patriarch Abraham at a crucial moment, attempting to derail the divine plan through temptation and deception. The text opens with Abraham rejecting the idols of his father Terah. He recognizes the futility of worshiping carved images and begins his journey toward the one true God. At this moment of spiritual awakening, the divine calls Abraham to prepare a sacrifice on a mountaintop. The ritual requires specific animals and strict preparation. Abraham obeys. As Abraham ascends the mountain with the sacrificial animals, an unclean bird descends repeatedly upon the carcasses. Abraham drives it away again and again, but it returns with persistent determination. The bird speaks with a human voice, revealing itself as something far more sinister than it appears. This is Azazel, though Abraham does not yet know the name. The creature attempts to dissuade Abraham from completing the sacrifice. It questions why Abraham bothers with such efforts, suggesting he turn back from this path. The voice carries subtle poison, planting doubt about the worthiness of Abraham's mission. Abraham rejects these whispers. He recognizes the unclean nature of the bird and refuses to listen to its counsel. The creature reveals more of its identity through their exchange. It claims a kind of authority, speaking as one who has power over the sacrifices and offerings of humanity. The implication becomes clear. This being sees itself as a rival to the divine, competing for human devotion and worship. An angel arrives to identify the tempter fully. The angel calls him Azazel, the disgrace and shame of all creation. The text describes him as one whose portion consists of those who practice wickedness and who belongs among the stars. This cosmic positioning elevates Azazel beyond a simple demon. He holds domain over the corrupted part of creation itself. The angel commands Azazel to depart, declaring that Abraham belongs to the divine, not to the ruler of the fallen realm. Azazel must return to his proper place beneath the earth among the roots of the underworld. The confrontation establishes a clear hierarchy. The tempter possesses power, but that power remains subordinate to divine authority. Azazel receives another title in this text that carries enormous weight. He is called the Lord of Hell, the one who rules over the realm where the wicked find their final home. This represents a significant evolution from earlier traditions. No longer merely a imprisoned watcher awaiting judgment, Azazel now actively governs the domain of punishment and corruption. The Apocalypse of Abraham presents Azazel as the embodiment of temptation itself. His method mirrors the serpent in Eden: plant doubt, offer alternative paths, question the divine command. Yet Abraham withstands where humanity's first ancestors failed. The patriarch's resistance demonstrates that humans can reject the tempter's voice when they remain firm in their commitment to the divine. This text bridges multiple traditions. It draws on the Enochic understanding of Azazel as a fallen watcher. It incorporates the Levitical association with sin and the wilderness. Yet it adds new dimensions, casting Azazel as an active spiritual adversary who encounters specific individuals at pivotal moments in salvation history. The timing of Abraham's encounter matters. At the very beginning of the covenant relationship between God and humanity's new chosen line, Azazel attempts interference. The implication suggests that forces of corruption actively oppose divine plans for redemption. Every significant step toward restoration meets resistance from the realm of rebellion. The image of the unclean bird carries symbolic weight. Birds represent spirits in many ancient traditions. An unclean bird specifically violates the categories of Levitical law existing in a state of impurity that separates it from the holy. Azazel's manifestation in this form reveals his essential nature. He is the embodiment of everything that stands outside the boundaries of divine order. The repeated attempts to defile the sacrifice mirror Azazel's broader role in cosmic history. Just as he taught humanity forbidden knowledge that corrupted their relationship with the divine, here he attempts to corrupt the very ritual that establishes covenant relationship. His presence threatens to render the sacrifice invalid, to prevent the connection between heaven and earth that Abraham seeks to forge. Abraham's persistence in driving away the bird demonstrates the human capacity for resistance. Unlike the antediluvian humans who accepted the Watcher's teachings, Abraham actively rejects the tempter. He recognizes corruption when he encounters it and refuses to let it interfere with his mission. This sets a pattern for future encounters between divine servants and the forces that oppose them. The Apocalypse of Abraham shows Azazel at his most active and dangerous. He is no longer bound in a pit awaiting judgment. Instead, he moves through the world, seeking to corrupt and derail divine purposes. This transformation reflects the evolution of thought about evil in the centuries following the composition of the Book of Enoch. The text also reveals the limits of Azazel's power. Despite his cosmic position and his role as Lord of Hell, he cannot overcome a single human who stands firm in devotion to the divine. The angel dismisses him with a command, and he must obey. His authority extends only as far as the divine permits, and no further. This portrayal would influence later traditions profoundly. The image of a spiritual adversary who tempts individuals at crucial moments, who claims authority over the corrupted portions of creation, who rules the realm of punishment, yet remains subordinate to ultimate divine power. These elements coalesce into the developed concept of a personal devil that emerges in later theology. Satan takes the throne, Azazel's legacy in the New Testament. The texts of early followers of Jesus rarely mention fallen angels by name, yet the concepts that developed around Azazel and the Watchers permeate their understanding of spiritual conflict. Whereas the New Testament presents a cosmic adversary called Satan, the accuser and tempter, who leads forces of darkness against the purposes of the divine. This Satan embodies characteristics drawn from multiple sources. He tempts like the serpent in Eden. He accuses, standing before the divine throne to point out human failings. He commands demons and unclean spirits who cause suffering and possess the vulnerable. He rules over a kingdom of darkness that opposes the kingdom of light. In all these roles, we glimpse the shadow of Azazel. The connection runs deeper than surface similarity. Communities that produced the New Testament texts were steeped in traditions about the fallen watchers. The Book of Enoch circulated widely. The story of angels who descended, corrupted humanity, and faced imprisonment formed part of the shared knowledge that shaped their worldview. Several New Testament passages directly reference this tradition. The letter of Jude quotes the Book of Enoch explicitly, citing the prophecy of coming judgment. Peter's second letter speaks of angels who sinned and were cast into chains of darkness to await judgment. These references demonstrate familiarity with the Watcher's narrative and acceptance of its basic framework. The Gospel accounts present Jesus confronting demons throughout his ministry. These unclean spirits recognize his divine authority and fear his power to cast them into the abyss. The language mirrors the Book of Enoch's description of the fallen angels' terror before divine judgment. The demons know their time is limited, that punishment awaits them at the appointed hour. Satan appears as the primary antagonist in the temptation narrative. After Jesus fasts 40 days in the wilderness, the tempter approaches with offers of power and provision. The wilderness setting connects to the realm where Azazel was bound, the desolate places where demons dwell. The nature of the temptation, offering forbidden knowledge of shortcuts and worldly authority, echoes Azazel's original sin of teaching corrupting wisdom to humanity. Paul's letters speak of spiritual forces arrayed against believers. Principalities and powers occupy the heavenly places, opposing the divine plan. A god of this world blinds the minds of unbelievers. These cosmic forces require more than human opposition. They represent a spiritual reality that can only be confronted through divine power. The Book of Revelation portrays Satan's ultimate fate in imagery that recalls Enochic tradition. The dragon and his angels fight against the heavenly host and lose. He is cast down to earth, then bound for 1,000 years, then released briefly before final judgment casts him into a lake of fire. This progression mirrors the Watcher's journey: rebellion, imprisonment, temporary influence, and ultimate punishment in eternal flames. None of these texts name Azazel directly, yet the conceptual DNA proves unmistakable. The New Testament Satan functions as the culmination of ideas about fallen spiritual beings that Azazel helped establish. He is the leader of rebellious angels. He corrupts humanity through forbidden knowledge and temptation. He faces certain judgment and eternal punishment. He rules over demons and the realm of the dead. These are Azazel's characteristics, now concentrated in a single adversary figure. The evolution makes sense within the historical context. As monotheism grew more absolute, the proliferation of named demons and fallen angels became theologically problematic. A single Satan unified the opposition, simplifying the cosmic drama into a clearer conflict between one god and one adversary. Azazel's story and characteristics merged with other traditions about spiritual evil, producing the comprehensive figure of the devil. This synthesis served practical purposes. Early believers faced persecution and suffering that demanded explanation. Why does evil persist? Why do the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper? The answer lay partly in acknowledging that spiritual forces actively oppose divine purposes. Satan and his angels work to corrupt, accuse, and destroy. Yet their power remains limited, their time is short, and their ultimate defeat is certain. The New Testament also emphasizes human responsibility in ways that the Enoch tradition sometimes obscures. While acknowledging spiritual opposition, these texts insist that humans make real choices. They are not merely passive victims of demonic corruption. They can resist temptation, reject false teaching, and align themselves with divine purposes. The figure of Satan represents real spiritual danger without eliminating human agency. The trajectory from Azazel to Satan reveals how religious ideas develop over centuries. Core concepts persist while adapting to new contexts. The name changes, but the narrative structure remains. Powerful spiritual beings rebel against divine authority, corrupt humanity, face judgment, and await ultimate punishment. This story proves remarkably durable across different communities and time periods. By the time the New Testament canon closed, Azazel had effectively disappeared as a named figure in mainstream tradition. Yet his legacy lived on in the developed concept of Satan. Every description of the devil's temptation, every reference to his coming judgment, every portrayal of his corrupting influence, all carry traces of the original story about a watcher who taught forbidden knowledge and was bound in the desert to await the end of days. The final judgment, Azazel's ultimate fate in 1st Enoch. The Book of Enoch does not end with Azazel's imprisonment in the desert pit. His story continues to its ultimate conclusion in the visions of final judgment that close the text. What was bound will be destroyed. What was hidden in darkness will face consuming fire. Enoch receives these visions during his heavenly journey. Angels guide him through the various levels of reality, showing him the places prepared for both the righteous and the wicked. He sees pleasant meadows where the souls of the faithful await resurrection. He also sees the places of punishment, the valleys of fire, where the rebellious angels face their ultimate fate. The text describes a valley with deep chasms that burn with eternal fire. This place has been prepared specifically for those who corrupted humanity, who led people astray into violence and forbidden practices. The Watchers who descended to Mount Hermon will end here, along with their leader. Azazel's crimes receive specific attention. He taught humanity to make weapons of war, enabling violence on a scale previously unknown. He revealed cosmetic arts that led to vanity and sexual corruption. He shared knowledge of signs and celestial movements that should have remained hidden. Each teaching multiplied sin across the earth. The judgment acknowledges these specific transgressions. Unlike the other Watchers who lusted after human women and produced the Nephilim giants, Azazel's primary sin was corrupting humanity through forbidden knowledge. Therefore, all the violence and bloodshed that followed stems from his teaching. The text lays the weight of human wickedness directly at his feet. The punishment fits this comprehensive guilt. Azazel will not simply be destroyed. He will be cast into the eternal fire alongside his fellow rebels. The text emphasizes the permanence of this fate. There is no escape, no reprieve, no eventual restoration. What fire begins will continue without end. The vision also includes the fate of the Nephilim, the giant offspring of the Watchers. These creatures have already perished in the flood, but their spirits remain active as demons, wandering the earth and causing harm. At the final judgment, these evil spirits will also face destruction. The corruption that began with the Watchers' descent will be completely purged from creation. Enoch sees the righteous gathered in contrast to this fate. They receive new bodies and dwell in transformed glory. The earth itself is renewed, becoming a place of perfect peace, where violence and corruption no longer exist. This restoration stands as the direct reversal of everything Azazel and the Watchers accomplished through their rebellion. The timing of this judgment matters. It does not occur immediately after the flood. The text portrays a cosmic timeline where fallen angels remain imprisoned during the age between the first destruction and the final renewal. Azazel lies bound in darkness while human history unfolds above. Only at the end will he face the ultimate punishment. This extended imprisonment serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates divine patience and the complex unfolding of justice. It also explains the continued presence of evil in the world after the flood. While the Watchers themselves are bound, the consequences of their actions ripple through time. The knowledge they shared cannot be unlearned. The violence they introduced continues to plague humanity. The final judgment resolves these lingering effects. When Azazel and his companions burn in eternal fire, the last connection to the original corruption will be severed. The knowledge will lose its corrupting power. The violence will cease. The boundary between heaven and earth, which the Watchers violated, will be permanently restored and guarded. The Book of Enoch presents this fate as absolutely certain. The angels who guide Enoch through his visions speak with unwavering confidence about what will occur. They show him the prepared places of punishment before anyone has been cast into them. The future judgment is so assured that it can be discussed as though it has already happened. This certainty serves the text's larger purpose. The Book of Enoch aims to reassure the faithful that injustice will not stand forever. The wicked prosper now, but their time is limited. Spiritual forces corrupt and destroy, but they face ultimate defeat. Azazel taught weapons and violence, spreading bloodshed across the earth, yet fire awaits him that will consume without mercy. The vision of Azazel's final fate completes his narrative arc. He begins as a powerful spiritual being who descends from heaven. He becomes a teacher of forbidden arts, corrupting humanity and enabling violence. Divine judgment binds him in a desert pit, removing him from direct influence. Finally, at the end of days, he burns in eternal fire, paying the ultimate price for his rebellion and its consequences. This progression from power to imprisonment to destruction establishes a pattern that influences countless later stories about fallen angels and demons. The arc proves deeply satisfying. Evil may flourish temporarily, may seem to triumph, but ultimate justice prevails. The corrupter becomes the corrupted, consumed by the very forces of destruction he unleashed upon the world. The enduring demon, Azazel's shadow in religion and culture. From a single mention in Leviticus to the complex figure in Enochic tradition, Azazel's journey spans centuries of religious development. His transformation reveals how communities wrestle with questions of evil, corruption, and divine justice. The scapegoat sent into the wilderness becomes the imprisoned watcher, becomes the template for ultimate adversaries. The power of Azazel's story lies partly in its ambiguity. The Torah mentions him without explanation, creating space for interpretation. Is he a place, a demon, a concept? This openness allows later traditions to fill the gap with increasingly detailed narratives. The Book of Enoch provides origin and personality. The Apocalypse of Abraham shows him in action. Each edition enriches the figure while maintaining connection to the original. Azazel embodies a specific type of evil, the corruption of knowledge. Unlike figures who simply destroy or oppose, Azazel teaches. He shares secrets that humanity should not possess. The weapons he reveals enable violence. The cosmetics create vanity. The celestial signs offer forbidden insight. His sin lies in transgressing boundaries of knowledge, offering humanity tools and understanding that lead to destruction. This makes him particularly relevant to perennial human concerns. Every generation possesses knowledge that could be used for harm. Every advance in technology or understanding brings potential for corruption alongside benefit. Azazil's story warns that some knowledge carries inherent danger, that boundaries exist for good reason, that wisdom requires restraint alongside learning. The geographic location of his punishment reinforces his nature. Bound in the desert wilderness, he inhabits the realm outside cultivation and order. The wilderness represents everything beyond human control, the dangerous places where chaos still holds sway. Sending the scapegoat to Azazel means returning sin to its source, expelling corruption back to the disordered realm where it belongs. Later traditions absorbed Azazel's characteristics into broader figures. Satan inherits his role as tempter and corrupter. Devils and demons take on his quality as a teacher of forbidden arts. The concept of fallen angels who corrupt humanity through superior knowledge becomes foundational to understanding spiritual evil. Yet the original name largely disappears from common usage. This absorption makes sense within monotheistic development. As Judaism, Christianity, and Islam developed more unified concepts of evil, the multiplicity of named demons became problematic. A single adversary simplified the cosmic drama. Yet the stories that surrounded figures like Azazel proved too compelling to discard. They merged into the characteristics of the devil, preserving their narrative power while adapting to new theological frameworks. Modern readers encounter Azazel primarily through academic study or cultural references. Fantasy literature and occult traditions revive ancient demon names, including Azazel among their hierarchies. These contemporary uses often strip away the complex theological concerns that originally shaped his story, reducing him to a generic powerful demon or fallen angel. Yet the core questions his story addresses remain urgent. How do we explain the presence of evil in a world created by a good God? Why do humans possess knowledge that enables terrible destruction? What responsibility do we bear for the misuse of what we know? Where does corruption originate, and how can it be cleansed? These concerns motivated the ancient writers who developed Azazel's narrative, and they continue to trouble thoughtful people today. The scapegoat ritual that introduced Azazel addresses a fundamental human need, the removal of guilt and corruption. Communities require mechanisms for dealing with accumulated sin. The goat bearing the people's transgressions into the wilderness provides vivid imagery for this necessary cleansing. That the goat goes specifically to Azazel adds depth. Sin returns to its ultimate source, the one who first taught humanity to transgress. The Day of Atonement ceremony remains central to Jewish practice, though modern interpretation focuses more on repentance and divine forgiveness than on the scapegoat's destination. Yet the ritual's structure preserves the ancient understanding. Some sins require more than forgiveness. They need removal, expulsion, return to the chaos from which they emerged. Christian tradition adapted this imagery in powerful ways. The idea of a perfect sacrifice bearing away sin informs core theological concepts. Yet, where the Levitical goat went to Azazel in the wilderness, Christian understanding sees the sacrifice as complete in itself, needing no demon to receive what is expelled. The later tradition maintains the function while eliminating Azazel from the process. The scholarly recovery of texts like the Book of Enoch and the Dead Sea Scrolls brought Azazel back into view for modern audiences. These discoveries revealed the rich traditions of Second Temple Judaism that shaped early Christian thinking. They showed how communities developed complex angelologies and demonologies, creating detailed narratives to explain spiritual realities. These texts also reveal religious creativity in action. Ancient writers took sparse biblical references and constructed elaborate stories. They wove together different traditions, adding details and connections that made sense within their worldview. The result was a living tradition that adapted to new questions while maintaining continuity with the past. Azazel stands as a prime example of this process. From enigmatic mention to developed character to absorbed legacy, his story traces the evolution of religious ideas across centuries. He demonstrates how communities remember, adapt, and transform their traditions to address enduring questions about evil, corruption, divine justice, and ultimate restoration. The fallen watcher imprisoned in the desert awaits his final fate in fire. Yet his shadow extends across religious history, shaping how countless people understand the forces that corrupt and the judgment that awaits them. In this way, Azazel achieves a kind of immortality, not the divine eternity he perhaps sought in rebellion, but the enduring presence of a powerful story that continues to illuminate the darkness humans face.